Hey there, in this video I'm going to show you how to make a cute, scrappy, little bitty drawstring bag. So let's go! In order to make this mini drawstring bag, I'm going to be using a bunch of scraps of fabric that are kind of in this yellowy, neutral color scheme. And I like to start with a smaller piece to use as the starting point for my little scrappy drawstring bag. So I'm going to cut this into a smaller triangle and use that as the very beginning. You could start with a triangle, you could start with a square or a 5-sided piece of fabric, whatever you want. So I'm starting with this little triangle, and then I'm just going to be adding other pieces onto it one side at a time. So I'm going to start with the triangle and this little scrap and sew them with the right sides together. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to make sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end of my stitches. Once these two are attached, I am going to press them with the iron, and then I'm going to cut so that I have another nice straight line to attach to. So now I'll get a second piece, something not too huge, and how about this piece? And I'll attach it to this side in the same way. I'm just going to keep attaching pieces of fabric and straightening them out after they're sewn together. Once I have a decent size piece of patchwork fabric, I'm going to get a ruler and I'm going to find a 5" by 5" square in my piece, and hopefully it is big enough, and it is. So I'm finding a 5 by 5" square on top of my fabric, and I'm just going to mark it out first on 2 sides. Then I will flip my ruler over and mark it out on the other 2 sides to make sure I have nice straight edges. And if you don't have one of these rulers, you could definitely just use measuring tape and just take your time and mark out 5" by 5" with your measuring tape. Okay, so I've drawn a square, and I'm going to go ahead and cut that out of my patchwork panel here. And once this is cut out, I'm going to go through those same steps, and I'm going to make a second patchwork panel that is also 5" by 5". And I might use some of these little bits in that next panel. So I'm going to go ahead and set this aside and then start this process with more scraps of fabric. So I've made another patchwork panel here for my little drawstring bag, and I'm going to go ahead and draw another 5 by 5" square and cut it out with my scissors. Once my 2 panels for the outside of my bag are done, I'm going to cut out 2 pieces of fabric that are 5" by 2", and these are going to become the casing for the drawstring for the cord to run through. So again, I'm going to get my ruler, and I'm just going to cut out a 5 by 2" rectangle from some more scraps. Once my 2 rectangles are cut out, I'm going to fold over the short ends about 1/4 inch, maybe a little bit more than 1/4 inch, and press it, and then fold it over a second time and press it. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other short end. So fold it about 1/4 inch, press, fold, and press. And I'm going to repeat that with this little guy. And at the machine, I'm going to stitch right along this folded edge, with about 1/8 inch seam allowance away from that folded edge. And I'm going to do that for all 4 of my little folded over edges. Once I've sewn those edges in place, I'm going to fold the casings in half, and then I'm going to be pinning them onto my outside panels. And you're going to want to decide what do you want the top and bottom to be of your little bag. So I'm going to let these two edges be the top edges. Obviously it's pretty arbitrary because these are little scrappy panels. And I'm just sort of eyeballing that I want this more or less centered at the top edge of my outside panel. And I'm going to go ahead and put a couple pins there. And I'm going to do the same thing on this panel. And once the casing is pinned onto my fabric, I'm going to sew with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, approximately, straight down. My casings are in place on both of my panels, so now I want to place these with the right sides together, and I'm going to pin them along 3 sides and then stitch along 3 sides, leaving this top part with the casings open. And I'm going to sew my outer panels with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I want to make sure I don't sew over my casings, so they should be a little bit further than a 1/2 inch away. But you could just double check, and if you need to move your casings out of the way, you could move your casings out of the way. So I'm going to do a back stitch and just go around the 3 sides. These two are sewn together, so now I need to make the panels for the inside of my bag. This is another great place to use some of your small scraps of fabric. I'm going to be using this scrap, and I'm going to be including this selvage edge because it's going to be on the inside of the bag. It's not going to be very visible, and this is a chance to bust those scraps. So a bit of my selvage edge is going to show, and that is okay with me. It's going to be on the inside. Okay, so I'm just marking out my 5 by 5 inch squares like I did when I was making my outer panels. And I'm going to go ahead and cut these. Now that my 2 liner pieces are cut out, I've got them right sides together, and I'm going to stitch around 3 sides with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, making sure to back stitch at the start and stop. And I forgot to leave an opening in my liner fabric. So I'm gonna just seam rip about 3 inches in this bottom seam so that we can turn the whole bag right side out. So you need an opening about like that. Now I'm gonna take my outer panels that are all stitched together, turn it right side out. I'm gonna push those corners out as much as I can. You could snip the extra fabric off your corners if you want. I'm just going to push them out with my chopstick. Just take a moment. And then I'm going to put this in between my inner layers. Just slide it on in there. Hopefully it fits nicely. And then I want to line up the side seams. So I want to line up the side seam from my liner fabric with the side seam of my outer fabric and pin so that they stay together. Let's get a pin in there, and then do the same thing on this side. So line up the inner fabric seam with the outer fabric seam nicely and pin them together. And then we're going to stitch around this edge with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Since this is a pretty narrow opening, I'm going to be stitching around the inside here. So I'm going to lift my presser foot and get the bag underneath. And I'm going to be holding one side away from the presser foot and just go all the way around. I'm coming up to where I started sewing, and I'm just going to follow this row and try to get right on top of this original row with a few stitches. And then I want to do a back stitch. Once this top seam is done, I'm going to use the little opening I left in the bottom of the liner fabric. Actually, I didn't leave that opening. I seam ripped that opening. And I'm going to pull the outer panels through the inner panels, and I'm going to flip my inner panels right side out. And then I want to push out these corners nicely. And then I want to finger press the opening and sew it closed with a simple top stitch. All right, just make sure that the raw edges are folded in nicely with each other, and we're just going to sew straight down. And I am going to do a back stitch at the beginning and the end. I like to take a moment and tidy up all the loose threads. Once everything is tidied, all you got to do is push the liner fabric into the outer fabric. This bag is so cute. There's something so fun about making tiny things. I don't know, can you relate? Leave a comment below if you can relate to the satisfaction of sewing small things. Okay, I want to do one more seam. I'm going to do a top stitch around this edge, leaving the casings open just right below the casings. I'm going to do one more row of stitches just to give it a little bit more of a polished, finished look. So I'll be right back. So I did a little top stitching there just to give it a little extra pizzazz. And the next thing we're going to do is the last thing we're going to do, which is thread rope through the casing. You could use a shoelace for this. This is some organic cotton cording. You could use a ribbon. Really, whatever you have on hand that'll fit in the casing will work perfectly. And I am going to grab a safety pin. By the way, if you're getting any value out of this video, I would love a thumbs up. So go ahead and do that. All right, I'm going to safety pin the cord onto the pin and slip it in. Actually, this safety pin is a little bit big, but I think it's going to fit. Okay, so I'm pulling the cord through one of the casings, and now I'm going to pull it through the other casing. And we're going to go ahead and shorten it to size. And then we're going to do the same thing with another piece of casing. So let's just get a little knot in here. I'm using probably about 30 inches or less of the cording. Okay, so I'm going to repeat that and again clip the rope onto the safety pin. And now I'm going to enter on the other side of the knot, the first knot, and then flip around and come out the other end so that we have a knot on both sides of the drawstring bag. And I'm leaving about 3 inches of cording to make the knot on the side here. So just shorten that, make another knot. And this way you can tighten the bag from both sides and it just looks a little bit cuter. Oh my gosh, it's adorable. I love it. This bag is going to make an excellent gift for somebody. And if you're looking for more scrap busting projects like this, I'm going to link to another video right here.